So a little short presentation that was submission APIs proposal. Yeah, so here's a complete and exhaustive list of all standardized APIs we have in the ecosystem. And it's a pretty short list. We standardized this one a couple of years ago for searching event repositories. It was based on Ericsson's open binary closed source event repository API. But we removed some of the quirkier quirks, so it was a bit pared down. But what about sending events? That's a pretty fundamental operation in that pretty much everyone needs to do. In some cases, you can have direct access to the message bus. That's legitimate, but there are also reasons why you don't want to have that. For example, network-wise, it could be more desirable to use only HTTP, also for load balancing purposes and so on. Could also be you want to use a authentication means that isn't compatible with RabbitMQ. Maybe you don't use RabbitMQ at all, and so on. So HTTP-based message submission protocol would be, or API would be pretty nice. And having a standard for this would enforce alignment between different implementations. So what could such an API look like? Well, there is in run and publish two endpoints that you can use for sending events. You have the generate and publish endpoint, I think it's called, where you give an incomplete event and it generates an event for you and publishes it. The problem is it's not compatible with signing. It rewrites the event in various ways, so you can't use signed events for it. However, there is also the producer/message endpoint, which, as far as I can tell, does not touch the event at all, apart from changing white space and all that, which is fine for signing it, and yeah, should be fine for all purposes, I think. Use it like this, so it's quite simple. And I wonder then, could we just standardize this endpoint more or less? Because what we said when we did the event lookup API standardization was that we didn't want to. So I think we managed to make it more or less compatible with Ericsson's existing implementation, except that we didn't support crazy features. It was only sort of a pared down version with some limitations. So in other words, Ericsson's implementation was compatible with the new API if you stuck to the API. And I wonder if maybe we can do something similar here. There's no point in it would be nice if the existing rem publish implementation would comply with the new API, but if that's reasonable. So why can't we use rem publish directly then? Well, and just ignore standardizing on an API and writing an alternate implementation. Well, rem publish, I believe it does validate the events you post to it, but it doesn't support all the Eiffel editions. It's pretty slow in adapting new editions, and it could also be that it only accepts a single edition, namely the same one that is supported for the generate endpoint. And that edition is pretty old by now. They have been making some updates, I think, over the years, but it's still not the most current one. And that's a problem, of course. And if we look at the API, it requires a query parameter, the MP Eiffel semantics. The Ericsson folks can probably maybe say something about that, but apparently it was rem publish was built with support for multiple messaging protocols. I don't think there's ever been another implementation or a message protocol than the Eiffel semantics, but you always have to pass that to tell it which protocol you want to use, and it's always the same. So that's something we don't want to weld into an API. It doesn't make any sense.
There is another one. Yes.
There's okay.
Because we use Rem for the open source version.
Oh, okay. I thought you had another REM for that.
Yeah,
we're tweaking it and trying to reuse it. We managed to do that.
Oh, so you're actually using REM publish
Yes, both of them.
with the open source version.
Oh yeah, we just tweak it and adopt it into our own internal protocol versions. That's why it's sort of started that way.
Okay, that's astonishing, given the bugs I found in REM publish.
Well, we have resilient users.
Yeah, apparently very resilient. I mean, yeah. Okay, that's not the topic of the presentation, but I have stories.
Not sure how we got there, but we are there.
Yeah. Okay. And another quirk that I don't like with the API is that it supports passing multiple events in the same request, and also the response payload sort of reflects this, so that you get a response, you get a multi response, even though you pass in just a single event. And I don't think that's a great part of an API. So what I propose is that we, in the similar vein to the standardized ER lookup, we'll define a standardized API for submitting events, and use the rem publish endpoint as a starting point, make it as close as possible, but again, don't include quirks from the existing implementation in the standard. If we do this, it would be very easy to add another endpoint, the rem publish, that would comply with the standard API. It sounds like something that would be a 1 or 2 hour job, because it would be almost identical to the existing publish endpoint. So just the thoughts.
Oh, yeah.
Or questions are okay too.
Okay, that's also thoughts.
Yes.
Well, I was thinking, while at the sort of API discussion, wouldn't it be nice also to that we have and start discussing how to do that version-wise, compatible changes and so forth, because we have been wrestling a lot with backward compatibilities when we do load. And if you focus on the API, do that on a version-based, with the good version-based method, then the changes and support of different versions of the API, as we get into it, and we can have a much better situation when we're sort of adopting new things, new changes, and so forth. That would be great if we can do that at the same time.
That was done for the ER lookup API. I mean, since we only have one version of it, it's we're not handling versions in a way because we only have one, but it is version. It has a version number, and the existing implementation uses that version number in the URL. So if we introduce a version 2, things should go fine. But I think we should, of course, follow the same principle here.
I like that, because it gives sort of openings to manage things in a better way, changes, for example, and also preserving potential multiple ways of interacting for backward compatibility. Basically, because we have such an enormous amount of instances, and some of them just want new fresh software, some doesn't want to, and they also need to have the time to switch between an old API towards a new one. So we can have lingering periods, and all that makes changes so much easier.
Yeah. Yeah, we have in the Eiffel Goer service that we've developed in open source, which is our implementation of the lookup API. Originally, its version endpoint, its version was v1 alpha 1, and we used that for quite some time, and we realized that, well, the API spec is v1, even though the implementation is perhaps v1 alpha 1. So we introduced v1 in parallel, and we said, well, eventually we'll remove v1 alpha 1. And I looked into the use of v1 alpha 1 a while back, and it was nobody was using it except our monitoring, periodic monitoring of it. But for some reason, I didn't remove it then. And then when I looked around the vacation time this year, just to double check that nobody uses it, well, of course somebody is using it. So now I have to remove it. So we can't remove it yet, and it's been, I think we're using that compatibility endpoint, or having it available for about 2 years now. So you have to seize the moment. Any other comments or questions or thoughts?
I have other thoughts, and that is
Yeah.
basically just about REM itself. We have been doing some work to try to make sure that REM is more resilient. That it has a stable communication with message bus is sort of secured. It has sort of asynchronous properties to make sure that it will not be overloaded. Also, the possibility, for example, to have multiple REMs to cooperate, so you can basically have load balancing and the communication between REMs in order to sort of share loads and sort of advanced sort of scaling options. But it hasn't been set in motion yet. But the thing is that there were other things that we thought to be potential targets. For example, if you want to have extensive validation, you talked about sort of adding signing functions and automatic link lookup and things like that. So you can all put these things into REM, but then you have to sort of give REM a different architecture where you more or less come to the point, should we have sort of plugins to REM? In addition, because architecture-wise, otherwise you can't really manage. There's such richness in function on one single component. But that could be sort of a question for the future, because there's potential more than just being sort of an interface for sending, but also to adding value, making it easy to create and maintain events. For example, signing, checking of integrity, and making sure we're only producing events that matches the schema, for example. So schema validation could be one part of. So that we only correct the events being transmitted or produced from that point. So there's sort of lots of added values, and all these possibilities needs to be sort of shaped up architecturally into REM. And how to do that in a good way, I'm not sure. But my mind comes sort of to a potential plugin, even though I do hate plugins. But sort of a pluggable or adaptable functionality. Because otherwise REM is ready to use proportions.
Yeah. When you say signing, I guess you mean verification of the existing signatures. You can't. Well, unless you want to share your private key with REM, you can't do the signing on your behalf, unless you're going to use a generic key that probably doesn't.
Proxy. You have to give the proxy authority work on your behalf by means. I don't know exactly how, but proxy work has to be involved there.
Yeah, it sounds like a bit of a challenge security-wise to make sure that you only doesn't sign anything malicious.
Exactly. It is a trust and a proxy, but that's otherwise it wouldn't work. Sorry, because it would be really good if you can have that sort of signing thing being sort of outsourced, but it has to be done on a trustworthy basis.
Yeah,
definitely. Probably something that you don't do the first thing. You wake up in the morning, but that could be sort of a goal and an aim. If REM can receive such functionality and treat it in the way that it's But validation, yes. Well, you don't really validate before sending, yes. So it sort of confirms to certain sort of standards, yes.
Yeah.
And also help a little bit with linkage lookups. So nightmare, So you can do a lot of things in that area to help the event producer to offload it.
It has support for link lookups right now.
But it can be much richer.
Yeah.
That's rudimentary at the moment.
It's very rudimentary.
And it's only on an advisory basis. You can always say yes or no to it anyways. But those kind of things along the road, and then see where the scaling is an issue or not. I'm not sure. Depends on how many REMs you have, or if you have one massive one. But we have over
they can scale horizontally, so that's not really that problem.
Yeah.
We're scaling it horizontally because of a mutex that prevents mutex around the sending of the event. So we can't possibly send more than, depending on the network round trip, but a few dozen every second, which was a problem for us. So we had to scale it horizontally. But that bug has been fixed now.
Oh, yeah.
So actually, we can send in parallel.
Because we have situations where events were sent in enormous bursts, and that basically saturated the REM, and it basically sort of came down and didn't come up with back. So it was,
that bad. Okay.
Yeah, that bad.
Okay. Oh, we haven't seen that. Only that it has problems during high load. And it has a wonderful method called get random channel, which always returns the first channel in the pool. So it's very surreal reading the code. But that's a story for another day.
Yeah.
Let's move on with.
For next event.
Yeah.
I also have
yes. Sorry, Drake.
a completely different take on
Yes.
REM. we don't use RemRem, and we have our own setup, and maybe that's not good, I don't know. But referencing to this easy to get into Eiffel, stupid question, what does RemRem stand for? And as a beginner, when we are into Eiffel now, but I mean, when we started and I browsed the community, we saw this RemRem, but it's like, shouldn't it be Eiffel Publisher, like a more logical name? Like this is what it does. The RemRem, maybe it's super obvious for everyone, but what does RemRem stand for?
When you're a coder, sometimes you will be naming things not what it does, but how it does it. RemRem is such an example.
And how does
Is another
I have
rest
one more.
mailbox for something.
Yeah,
I don't remember.
which is not what it does, but rather how it does it.
Yeah.
And that's sort of the perspective you get when you get too close to the code. So you are the coder and you also name it. That's a common mistake.
I have homework to do, but I mean, maybe it's a legacy name then.
Yeah.
But for referring to yesterday's discussion about easy, maybe we should promote that tool more than if that is what the community promotes us. If you want to work with easily, start promoting the events and stuff. RemRem is a great way that this is core, but it's not a good name because it's not obvious when you see it in the GitHub. Like, okay, I will download this.
No, I totally agree.
We gave up on good naming a long time ago, to be honest, but I think it's a valid point, definitely.
So the question on name is REST mailbox for registered messages.
I will do my homework.
Yeah.
But I mean, I'm just hoping we will not do it today and maybe not tomorrow. But it is not obvious when you're new and community.
And you need to write it in the correct way because the last but one E should be small. The other one should be big.
Okay.
Just to make things even more complicated.
Yeah, I mean, for beginners, it's this is
Sounds
pretty
like it
complex.
should be renamed.
Yeah.
To
Yeah.
something.
The shortcut doesn't really say anything.
Yes.
No, it doesn't. It really doesn't say anything, or perhaps even pointless.
I had one comment into RemRem generally, and that is more sort of on a little bit sort of zoom out perspective. When introducing using RemRem, one has sort of gone away from event-based communication pattern because now we are talking about point to point, and it's not really adhering to the original sort of infrastructure. If you know what I mean, you take sort of a step back and say that this is point-to-point communication. It's that sort of event-based, even though you're sending events, but you do that on a point-to-point, so that going message pass and with those sort of event-driven things. So that could be an interesting thing to put into.
I mean, it's not point to point, but you're using a proxy, you could say.
Yeah, but it's
Okay.
borderlining it, isn't it?
I don't think I agree.
You don't have to.
No.
Could be a topic for another discussion as well.
Yeah.
When talking about interfaces and how that should be done in terms of general interfaces on an event-based, how should those interfaces be, and what is sort of event-based interfaces in general? How can those interfaces look? I mean, AMQP has a different interface, even though it's supposed to be something. Then we have sort of the sheer reception of messages and you're sending and receiving. If there be sort of a consistent set of APIs, what that will look like. Make sure we have sort of a fair way to integrate towards event infrastructure or defining an event infrastructure. What interfaces should that be as a general mix? Because this discussion about interfaces doesn't only apply to sending events, it's also receiving events and do other things with the infrastructure. So one want to be consistent there. That's what I mean.
Yeah. Could be a reason to look into API for receiving. Although I think it's harder to do that correctly. Yeah.
But still, consistency is very important when talking about event-based infrastructure as sort of a entity. Consistency in interfaces, if one can.